Welcome to True Echo, where powerful real-life inspired stories reveal the strength of dignity, justice, and humanity in the face of misunderstanding and bias. Today's story takes you deep into the foggy waters of the Atlantic, where one man's quiet strength forces an entire system to take a hard look at itself. What begins as a routine Coast Guard inspection quickly unravels into a moment that shakes the nation. This is the story of Leonard Trenton. Stay with us, because by the end, you'll see why silence speaks louder than words. The Atlantic shimmered beneath the veil of thick morning fog, a hush over the waves that felt too deliberate, like the sea itself was holding its breath. 12 miles southeast of Savannah, Georgia, the USCG Seaforth sliced steadily through the mist. On the bridge, coffee cups steamed beside weather-worn hands and chatter buzzed from the radio about shifting buoys and a weak front from the Gulf. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until Seaman Tyler McKnight lowered his binoculars slowly, his forehead creasing. "Skipper," he said, tapping his boot on the deck. "You seeing this?" Lieutenant Graham Ricks looked up from his clipboard, the silver bars on his collar catching a rare shaft of sunlight slicing through the fog. He turned toward the bow, squinting. Through the gray curtain, a faint hull shape appeared, unnaturally still, drifting in lazy circles. The Seaforth's onboard chart pinged it too, dead in restricted waters, hugging the edge of a known submarine testing lane. Ricks frowned. "Radio it," he said sharply. McKnight clicked to channel 16. "This is United States Coast Guard cutter Seaforth. Vessel located south-southwest of buoy T9, state your name, registration, and intent." "Repeat, this is U.S. Coast Guard." No answer. Only the mournful cry of gulls. "Second hail," Ricks ordered. Still nothing. "That's enough." Ricks turned to the helm. "Bring us alongside. Prep boarding team." The hum of the cutter shifted to a low growl as engines throttled down. Boatswain's mate Renee Callahan slung a rope ladder over the side and secured it. McKnight checked the line thrower. "Routine, yes, but everyone's pulse ticked up a notch." "Unknown vessel." No response. "Close to sensitive coordinates." The rulebook was clear. As the Seaforth closed in, the name on the faded teal fishing boat came into view, Mercy Bell, spelled in chipped gold paint across her stern. One man stood at the helm. He was black, mid-40s perhaps, his stance straight-backed, deliberate. He wore a khaki windbreaker zipped to the neck and a navy ball cap low over his eyes. His hands were in plain sight. His face calm. But what struck McKnight wasn't what the man did, it was what he didn't. No panic. No flinching. No attempt to run. Just silence. Ricks raised the loud hailer. "Captain, kill your engine and prepare to be boarded." The man gave a single nod, shut off the engine, and stepped back from the helm. "Clean, like he's done this before," Callahan muttered as they boarded. Her boots hit the deck first. "Morning, sir." "Name and registration, please," she said. "I'm Leonard Trenton." "Papers are clipped to the console," came the quiet reply. There was something unervingly level about his voice. Calm under pressure didn't cover it, this man exuded command. Callahan checked the registration, all appeared in order. Legal vessel. Georgia numbers. Valid inspection. But Ricks had seen clean paperwork hide plenty. He signaled for a full inspection. "We're going to need to search your vessel," McKnight added, hand near his holster. Trenton nodded. "Go ahead." "Then, the cuffs." "Just a precaution," Callahan said as she stepped behind him. The click of the cuffs echoed louder than the seagulls. He didn't resist. If anything, he made it easier. That silence, that eerie cooperation, made McKnight more nervous than if the man had argued. Down below, McKnight pulled open compartments, bait, ice, gear. Nothing illegal. No contraband. Just a battered thermos and yesterday's coffee grounds. Still, The radio silence and proximity to a restricted lane meant they had to keep digging. And that's exactly what they did. On deck, Trenton remained still, watching the sky like he was waiting for the ocean itself to pass judgment. The search would turn up nothing suspicious. But what they'd find in a database a few minutes later would unravel everything. Lieutenant Ricks tapped his fingers against the steel railing of the Mercy Bell, eyes narrowed. The search was thorough. Coolers, compartments, emergency flares, registration, tackle, ropes, all accounted for. Legal. Boring, even. But the man standing in cuffs wasn't boring. He was too calm. Too certain. And that made Ricks uneasy. "You fish these waters often?" Ricks asked, more out of instinct than regulation. "Twice a month," Leonard Trenton answered simply. "When the weather holds. Usually out of Thunderbolt Marina." His voice was low, but not evasive. There was something measured in his cadence. Something that made even McKnight hesitate before asking his next question. "You ex-military?" the seaman ventured, a little uncertain. "I am." Ricks straightened. "What branch?" "Navy." McKnight raised a skeptical brow. "You just say that, or you mean it?" Trenton's eyes finally met his. "I did 22 years. Retired." "Commander." There was no smugness in his tone. No challenge. Just fact. Callahan looked up sharply from the console. Even she flinched a little. "Commander? Not a rank you throw around lightly." "If that's true," Rick said, "why didn't you say something earlier?" "You didn't ask." That answer landed hard. Not disrespectful. Just, correct. Ricks turned away, embarrassed at how quickly they'd leapt to suspicion, then over to the folded windbreaker on the seat Trenton had indicated earlier. "Check for ID," he ordered. Callahan unzipped the jacket pocket. Inside, she found a worn Georgia driver's license, a laminated military ID with a retired Navy insignia, and 2 photographs, one of Trenton in uniform, saluting, younger but unmistakably him, the other, a faded snapshot of 2 kids smiling in front of a crooked Christmas tree. She handed the IDs to Ricks without a word. He pulled out his tablet and began typing into the Department of Homeland Security's access portal. It was standard procedure, though normally, this would have come first. Trenton said nothing, standing silently at the rail. His fingers, still cuffed behind his back, flexed once, then stilled again. McKnight leaned over Ricks's shoulder as the profile began to load. The page took forever to render. It felt intentional. Like even the database itself understood the gravity of what was about to appear. Then it came. Name, Leonard Isaiah Trenton. Rank, Commander, retired. Service, United States Navy. Years active, 1996 to 2018. Clearance, TS/SCI, expired. Commendations, Navy Cross, Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal X2, Combat Action Ribbon. Assignments, USS Russell, USS Gridley, Naval Special Warfare Command, 5th Fleet Command, Bahrain. Ricks blinked. McKnight whispered, Navy Cross. That's like, just below the Medal of Honor, right? No one answered. Ricks kept scrolling. Attached was a citation, a vivid, gripping account of a rescue mission near the Strait of Hormuz. A civilian tanker engulfed in flames. Enemy fire pounding the deck. Trenton's ship listing heavily. He stayed behind to evacuate the crew. 29 lives saved. 2 sailors went overboard. Trenton dove in himself. Pulled both to safety. Callahan muttered, Jesus. The silence that followed wasn't just embarrassment, it was shame. They had cuffed a man who had once jumped into hostile waters to save others. Who had led missions under fire. Who had risked his life more times than anyone on their cutter probably ever would. And he hadn't even raised his voice. Ricks looked up slowly. We cuffed him. McKnight stared at Trenton, still standing, unmoved. Not smug. Not defiant. Just waiting. Let him out, Rick said quietly. Callahan stepped forward. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unlocked the cuffs. They dropped to the deck with a dull metallic thud. Trenton rolled his shoulders once, as if shaking off more than just metal. I apologize, sir, Rick said. His voice was soft. Honest. We should have checked sooner. Trenton turned, his eyes steady. You didn't ask who I was, he replied, until after you assumed what I must be. The words weren't angry. But they cut deep. McKnight lowered his gaze. There was no excuse. He thought he'd been following protocol, but now it felt hollow. We had radio silence, restricted waters, Rick's tried. Trenton's voice interrupted, even and firm. Do your job. Inspect the boat. Ask questions. That's what you're trained for. But I got cuffed before a single question was asked. That part? That wasn't protocol. Callahan's hands curled into fists at her sides. She knew he was right. Then, from across the water, a new voice. Feminine. Loud. Angry. Is that him? Are you kidding me? That's Commander Trenton. I know him. All heads turned. A woman stood on the deck of another boat, cell phone raised, recording. She kept shouting, her voice full of disbelief and fury. By the time the Seaforth returned to Hunter Army Airfield, the video clip was already online. And going viral. It didn't take long for the video to explode. The clip wasn't polished. No filters. No captions. Just raw footage taken by a boater who happened to be nearby when the Coast Guard cuffed a man silently standing on his own vessel. In the frame, a black man in a windbreaker. Hands bound behind his back. Calm, still. And around him, uniformed Coast Guard officers rummaging through compartments, one calling out directions, another watching from the Seaforth. The caption read. Retired Navy Commander Leonard Trenton wrongly cuffed. You tell me why. By the time the cutter docked, the video had already been shared over 400,000 times. Within 10 hours, it made the homepage of several major news networks and military forums. The story wrote itself, at least on the surface. Decorated black Navy veteran. Wrongfully detained in U.S. waters. Calm, compliant, humiliated. The internet didn't hold back. Comments flooded in. How do you do that to a man with the Navy Cross? This is what racial profiling looks like, clean-cut and in uniform. He didn't even raise his voice. And that's what hurts the most. Someone found an old photo of Trenton in full dress whites, standing straight at a funeral, saluting beside a casket draped in the flag. The medals on his chest gleamed like silent witnesses. That image went viral too. The Seaforth's crew became faces in a national conversation they never intended to start. Their expressions in the video, calculated, businesslike, were dissected by talking heads and Twitter threads alike. Lieutenant Graham Ricks was especially targeted. That's the face of someone who knows he messed up and can't undo it. You don't need training to recognize dignity. You need humanity. Some called for his resignation. Others asked for policy reform. A few defended the crew, pointing out the radio silence and restricted waters. But even those voices couldn't deny what was obvious. They cuffed a man without ever asking who he was. Leonard Trenton, however, stayed silent. He declined interview requests. Ignored the reporters outside his modest Savannah home. Didn't respond to the veterans groups asking to speak on his behalf. And when a well-known daytime talk show offered to fly him to New York, he didn't even return the call. Instead, he sat in his garage with the door half open, patching a worn fishing reel with calloused fingers. The hum of cicadas filled the humid evening as his phone buzzed every few minutes. He didn't answer it. He wasn't angry. Not in the way people wanted him to be. Rage was easy. He'd learned that long ago. Grace took effort. And it had cost him too much already to abandon it now. Then, 3 days after the incident, someone knocked at his front door. It was Captain Everett Sloan. District Commander, Coast Guard, Charleston. Crisp white uniform. Narrow jaw. Regulation smile. But his eyes were uncertain. "Commander Trenton," he said, extending a hand. Trenton stood slowly, wiped his hands on a rag, and shook it. "I appreciate you seeing me," Sloan said. "I didn't want this to be a press stunt. I'm here because I wore the uniform, too. And I know, we failed you." Trenton didn't reply. He didn't need to. Sloan continued, voice low, almost reverent. "There will be retraining. A full review. We've issued a public apology. But I wanted to say it to your face. You were wronged. We saw it. The world saw it. But the worst part." He paused. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" Still, Trenton said nothing. Just waited. Let the man sit in that silence. Sloan sighed. "I came here for one reason. Not to save face. Not to shift blame. But to ask if you'd be willing to help us do better. Help us change it, permanently." Trenton studied him for a long moment. Then stepped aside. "Then let's start now," he said. And with that, the conversation shifted from damage control to accountability. That weekend, the Coast Guard and the city of Savannah co-hosted a public town hall at the Civic Center. No cameras were barred. No topics off limits. It was standing room only. Veterans in full regalia. Active duty officers. Local leaders. Civilians. Families. Students. Even protesters. They all came. At the center of the panel table sat Leonard Trenton. No uniform. Just a black button-down shirt, worn jeans, and the same quiet presence that had shaken the country. One by one, people took the mic. A woman in her 50s, white, Marine mother, eyes red-rimmed. "I watched that video 5 times. I kept thinking, if that were my son. Or my husband. And then I thought, how many times has this happened with no camera?" An older black veteran stood next. His voice was steel. "It happens all the time. This time. Y'all just got caught." The room hummed with discomfort. Some nodded. Others didn't move at all. Then, someone unexpected stepped up. Lieutenant Ricks. He wore his formal uniform, but the sharpness was gone from his posture. He cleared his throat, then leaned into the mic. "We made assumptions based on race," he said plainly. "That's what happened. Not bad paperwork. Not missed radio calls. Not protocol. Perception. We saw a black man on a boat near restricted waters, and we assumed the worst." A pause. "And I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. But I won't pretend we didn't fail." It was quiet afterward. Not cold. Just, heavy. Then, Trenton stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I served this country for over 2 decades, he began. I led missions. I trained officers. And I still get asked to prove I belong here. Not by civilians, but by people in uniform." He turned slightly, scanning the room. "This isn't about one boat. One moment. One mistake. It's about what we're trained to expect. Who we're trained to suspect. You want to fix it? Then stop teaching fear disguised as safety." He sat back down. And the room breathed, as one. After the town hall, the story evolved. Not in volume, the viral clip had already reached millions, but in tone. It was no longer just outrage. Now, it was reflection. Not only had a wrong been committed, but someone had modeled what it looked like to stand in dignity without retaliation. Leonard Trenton didn't fight. He didn't scream. And somehow, that made people listen more closely. A local journalist from WTOC captured a short clip outside the Civic Center that night. A group of high school ROTC cadets had lingered behind, hoping to meet Trenton. He spoke with them casually, leaning against the side of a parked SUV. One of the cadets, a lanky boy with braces and scuffed shoes, asked, "Sir, how come you didn't get mad?" "I mean, they cuffed you." Trenton looked at him, then smiled faintly. "I've got grandkids," he said. "Anger's easy. What they need to see is grace and power without fear." The clip was under 30 seconds. It was reshared by educators, veterans groups, and even parenting blogs. No hashtags. No filters. Just a man speaking truth without bitterness. The internet dubbed him Commander Calm. But back home, he was still just Leonard. A widower. A fisherman. A grandfather. While pundits debated policies and training gaps, Trenton did something quieter. He started visiting military and law enforcement training centers, not as a victim, not as a guest speaker, but as a teacher. It began with a Coast Guard base in Brunswick. Then Paris Island. Then the Navy Technical Training Command in Pensacola. Every room was different, but the message never changed. He'd walk in. Quiet. Measured. Commanding without being loud. And he'd always start the same way. "Close your eyes." The room would shuffle. Recruits, instructors, seasoned officers, all obeyed. "Now," he said, "picture a threat. Pause. Ask yourself, who did you see?" The silence afterward was always uncomfortable. That was the point. More important than what you saw, he continued, is why you saw it. Some cadets would fidget. Others would nod. A few scoffed. But most went still. Trenton didn't use charts or buzzwords. He told them what happened. On the Mercy Bell. In the fog. With the cuffs. With the silence. And then he walked them through what could have been different, step by step. Not to shame. But to sharpen. Every assumption, he told them, is a shortcut. And sometimes that shortcut skips past someone's entire story. Back at the Seaforth, things were changing too. The command chain initiated a review of all boarding procedures, not just legally, but culturally. Officers began rotating through a new module, Implicit Perception and Civilian Engagement, co-authored with guidance from retired veterans, behavioral psychologists, and, yes, Leonard Trenton. Gone were the outdated slideshows and checkbox quizzes. In their place were case breakdowns. First-hand narratives. Video reviews. And hard questions like, would you have cuffed a white man on a boat that clean, or, what does danger look like to you, and why? Ricks made it a point to sit through the first training session himself. Not as an observer. As a student. Afterwards, he drove down to Trenton's house. No press. No cameras. Just two men on a wooden porch, iced tea sweating through the glass, and the wind curling through mossy oak branches. "I thought I knew what leadership was," Rick said quietly. "I didn't. Not really. Not until that day." Trenton didn't respond right away. He sipped his drink. Then nodded. Then it wasn't wasted. That evening, they didn't talk about the video. Or the aftermath. Or the online chaos. They talked about the Navy. About deployments. About exhaustion. About coming home. The next morning, Trenton went out on the Mercy Bell again. Same route. Same bait. But this time, he brought a kid from the local youth center. Name was Carter. 16. Wanted to join the military but had never set foot on a boat. They cast lines. Trenton showed him knots. Taught him patience. And when Carter asked, "Why'd they do it to you?" Trenton just said, "Because some people haven't learned how to see past what they expect. But you can." And Carter nodded, because that made sense in a way no textbook ever had. By the end of the week, other youth were asking to join. Not because they wanted to fish, necessarily. But because they wanted to understand. Because something about Trenton made people want to listen. Meanwhile, the Mercy Bell became more than a boat. It became a quiet symbol. Not a protest. Not a brand. Just a place where stories were told. Where dignity floated above the tide, stubborn and unshaken. Part 5 coming next. Ban de NOI. Part 5 coming next. ChatGPT de NOI. Part 5. The calls kept coming. News networks. Authors. Even a high-ranking Pentagon official who just wanted 5 minutes with Commander Trenton. But Leonard wasn't interested in media cycles or book deals. He wasn't trying to build a platform, he was trying to build people. At Thunderbolt Marina, where the Mercy Bell was docked, they'd started calling him Coach. Not because he barked orders or gave speeches, but because kids left his boat with straighter backs and bigger questions. And every few trips, there'd be a new one, someone he'd agreed to take out on the water. Not because they deserved it. But because they needed it. Sometimes, it was a teenager teetering on the edge of dropping out. Other times, it was a foster kid with no real family but a deep curiosity about the stars. One afternoon, it was a young white cadet from the Coast Guard Academy, sent by a supervisor who thought he needed perspective. That cadet didn't talk much during the ride. But he listened. Trenton showed him how to bait a line, talked him through tidal changes, and let him steer for a mile. Then, when they dropped anchor, the cadet finally asked, "Sir, if you had to go through it all again, the cuffs, the embarrassment, would you?" Trenton reeled in slow. "Would I choose it?" "No," he said. "But if it means the system shifts an inch? If it means someone like you pauses when it counts? Then maybe it was worth it." The cadet didn't respond. But before stepping off the boat, he shook Trenton's hand and said, "I'll remember this longer than any class." Back on land, Lieutenant Ricks was facing his own evolution. He'd submitted himself for voluntary disciplinary review, not because he was forced, but because he believed it mattered. The review board recommended additional training, community service, and mentorship rotation with veterans outreach programs. He accepted every term. More than that, he volunteered for community speaking engagements. Churches. VFW halls. High schools. Each time, he recounted what happened on the Mercy Bell, not to defend it, but to own it. "I was trained to scan for threats," he told a group of public safety recruits in Jacksonville. "But no one ever taught me to check my assumptions." Then he'd pause. "And I cuffed a hero because of it." That line made headlines again. But this time, they weren't mocking him. They were quoting him. The Coast Guard, too, began to adjust. A new directive circulated through regional branches, requiring human bias response training in all boarding procedures, especially involving civilian encounters. They called it Trenton Protocol. It included not just tactical guidance but philosophical reinforcement, acknowledging that mistakes rooted in bias weren't just personal, they were institutional. It was the first time many officers had been required to face the question, "Who do you think is a threat, and where did you learn that?" It wasn't comfortable. But that was the point. Meanwhile, word reached Washington. A committee hearing convened, part of a broader push into civilian-military relations. And while Trenton declined to testify on camera, he submitted a written statement that echoed across agencies. "I served in war zones," it read. "But some of the hardest battles are fought on home turf, quiet battles, where respect is lost before words are spoken." We don't need more weapons. We need more wisdom. That line was quoted on the floor of Congress. Twice. But Trenton didn't gloat. He didn't comment. He went fishing. Not because he was trying to escape. But because that boat had become his classroom. And there were still students to teach. Back on the Seaforth, McKnight struggled. He hadn't spoken much since the incident. Not even to Callahan, who tried to reassure him more than once. But it wasn't just guilt eating at him, it was doubt. He remembered Trenton's words too well. Would it have mattered if I told you who I was? And the truth was, he wasn't sure it would have. That realization haunted him. So one Saturday, with permission from command, McKnight drove to Trenton's house. Not in uniform. Just jeans and a t-shirt. He stood on the porch, awkward, quiet. Trenton opened the door slowly, eyes flicking to the unfamiliar car in the drive. I don't need an apology, Trenton said before McKnight could speak. I didn't come for that, McKnight replied. I came to ask, if I could ride with you. Trenton raised a brow. You know how to tie a blood knot? No, sir. Then be here at 6 a.m. Bring coffee. I like dark roast. McKnight smiled. Yes, sir. That was how it started. Not a punishment. A second chance. By sunrise, McKnight was waiting at the dock, coffee in hand, nerves buzzing. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe a lecture. Maybe silence. But when Trenton arrived, he just nodded once, climbed aboard the Mercy Belle, and pointed to a coiled line. Start with the knots, he said. McKnight fumbled at first. Trenton didn't correct him immediately. He let the younger man wrestle with the line until frustration started to settle in. Then, quietly, he stepped closer. Hold tension here, Trenton said, guiding McKnight's hands. Let it give a little, not too much. It's not a fight. It's a balance. It was more than instruction. It was a metaphor. McKnight didn't miss it. The boat hummed gently across the water as fog lifted over the horizon. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then McKnight finally said it. I thought I was doing my job. Following protocol. You were, Trenton said, baiting his hook. But you forgot the part they can't write into manuals. McKnight glanced at him. What's that? Judgment. Trenton cast his line, watching it arc into the morning calm. They can train you to board a vessel. They can train you to shoot. But no manual teaches you how to see someone for who they are before deciding what they are. McKnight nodded slowly, eyes on the water. I'm sorry, he said. For everything. Trenton didn't respond right away. Then, you can be sorry. Just don't stop there. Use it. And that was the lesson. Use it. Use the shame. The doubt. The awareness. Turn it into something better than the moment that caused it. McKnight wouldn't forget that. Back on the mainland, something unexpected happened. The Savannah Police Department reached out, not to investigate, not to spin, but to learn. They invited Trenton to speak. At first, he declined. Said he wasn't looking to be a spokesperson. But they asked again. This time, not to give a lecture, but to train instructors. To shape policy. Trenton finally agreed, on one condition. No slide decks, he said. No buzzwords. Just people talking to people. What followed was a quiet revolution. They called it the Mercy Training, named not after the virtue, but after the boat. It was built around scenario walkthroughs, community roundtables, and role reversals. Officers played civilians. Civilians played officers. And then they talked about what they felt. Not as subjects. As humans. One of the officers, a hard-edged sergeant who hadn't spoken through half the session, finally broke the silence. I didn't realize how fast I jumped to suspicion, he admitted. Even when nothing feels off. And Trenton said, that's the danger. Not reacting when something's wrong. But reacting when nothing is. The training spread. First to Charleston. Then Mobile. Then San Diego. It wasn't mandatory. But people showed up anyway. Because it wasn't shame-based. It was growth-based. Meanwhile, the Mercy Bell had become more than a vessel. It had become a floating classroom. That summer, Trenton added 3 more teens to his list. One was the son of a local judge. Another was a girl from a rural county with dreams of flying Navy jets. The third, quiet, lanky, awkward, just wanted to learn how to swim. On one trip, as the sun dipped low and turned the water gold, the girl asked, "Do you think they'll ever stop seeing us as threats?" Trenton reeled in a line slowly. "No," he said. "Not all of them. But enough will learn to pause. And sometimes, that's enough." She nodded. "That's why you teach?" Trenton smiled gently. "No. I teach because someone once paused for me." That night, on the dock, McKnight stayed behind to help clean up. As he secured the rods, he asked a question he hadn't dared ask before. "Do you ever wish you weren't on that boat that day?" Trenton looked at him for a long time. "No," he said. "Because if I hadn't been, maybe nothing would have changed." McKnight swallowed hard. "You could have yelled. You could have sued. Why didn't you?" Trenton's answer was soft, almost lost in the hum of the dock lights. "Because grace reaches places anger never will." And just like that, McKnight understood. Trenton hadn't just turned the other cheek. He'd turned the entire conversation. It wasn't a headline anymore. It had been weeks since the Mercy Bell incident, since cuffs clinked on the wrists of a war hero in the quiet fog of the Atlantic. But the story hadn't disappeared. It had simply settled. Into conversations. Into policies. Into people. The virality had faded, but the impact had deepened. Leonard Trenton never gave a TED Talk. Never wrote a book. He didn't accept interviews or start a nonprofit. He just kept showing up, on the dock, in the classroom, in the spaces where people still listened without needing cameras pointed at them. And that made all the difference. One Saturday afternoon, the Savannah Civic Center hosted a follow-up community forum. Smaller this time. No news crews. No trending hashtags. Just people. Faces who'd watched from afar now gathered to talk. Ricks was there. So was McKnight. So was Callahan, sitting beside a teenage girl who turned out to be her niece, newly enrolled in junior ROTC because she wanted to protect people the right way. Trenton arrived without fanfare. No name tag. No entourage. Just him, and that quiet steadiness that had become a kind of anchor for everyone who'd crossed his path. During the forum, a young officer stood. "Sir," he said, clearing his throat. "I'm new. Just graduated. I watched the video, and I've been wondering, how do I make sure I never do what they did?" Trenton studied the man for a moment. Then answered in a voice steady as a tide. "Ask one more question." The officer blinked. "That's it," he said. "That's everything," Trenton replied. "Before you reach for cuffs, before you assume, before you write someone off, ask one more question. About who they are. Why they're there. What they've seen. You'd be surprised what one pause can change." The room fell silent. But it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. That evening, after most had left, Trenton walked the dock one last time before heading home. He stopped by the Mercy Bell, brushing a hand across her hull. She was old. Faded. Weathered. But still steady. Like him. From behind, Ricks approached quietly. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. No, Trenton replied without turning. You just owe it to the next person to do better. Rick stood beside him. We renamed the module, he said. It's called the Trenton Pause now. Trenton gave a small smile. Good name. We're also revising all post-boarding checklists. ID verification comes before detainment from now on. And we're incorporating civilian liaisons into every community harbor patrol. That's not just change, Trenton said. That's correction. They stood in silence for a while. Listening to the lapping water. Watching the sky dim. You taught us something, Rick said. And not just about race. About restraint. About leadership. I didn't teach you, Trenton replied. You learned. The next day, Trenton was back out on the water. This time, with a boy no older than 10 sitting on the bow, feet dangling over the edge, face lit with wonder. He was the grandson of a former SEAL who'd asked Trenton to show him the ocean through your eyes. They fished. Talked. Laughed a little. And when the boy asked, Grandpa said you got arrested for being brave, is that true? Trenton chuckled. Sort of, he said. But it wasn't about bravery. It was about helping people see better. How? Trenton looked out at the horizon. Sometimes, people forget that everyone they meet has a story, he said. I reminded them. That's all. The boy was quiet for a moment. Then, can I remind people too? Trenton smiled. You already are. That was the legacy. Not a scandal. Not a headline. But a ripple. One that touched training manuals, conversations, families, and strangers. One that turned a mistake into a movement. Quiet. Steady. Powerful. Because dignity, once taken, is hard to reclaim. But when restored, it becomes a force that transforms more than just the person wronged, it transforms those who witnessed it. Leonard Trenton never asked for justice in front of a microphone. He lived it. And in doing so, reminded a nation that the most powerful authority isn't rank or protocol. It's grace. In a world too quick to judge, one man's silence revealed more than 1,000 voices could shout. Leonard Trenton's story is a mirror, not just for the Coast Guard, or the military, or the justice system, but for every one of us. Before you make an assumption, before you cast a label, ask one more question. That pause could be the difference between dignity and disgrace. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment your thoughts below, and tell us, what would you have done differently? Subscribe to True Echo for more real, raw, and powerful stories that inspire. Because truth echoes louder when we listen.